G'day, I'm Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director at the Australia Institute, and I'm delighted to be here with Allan Behm. He's the head of our International and Security Affairs program at the Australia Institute and author of the new book, No Enemies, No Friends, Restoring Australia's Global Relevance. Allan, tell us a little bit about the book.
Well, this book tries to deal with the question, why is Australia so good at getting so many things so bad? And what we normally do to answer that question is blame everybody else or blame circumstances. But what I'm looking at is whether or not there aren't fundamental, what I call pathologies, in our national strategic mindset that cause us to behave the way in which we do. And I think there are. I list 6 of them, but I'll only touch on 1 or 2 of them right now, just so that people can want to read the book and find out what the others are. But I think that racism and misogyny are deep within our national character, and that they do colour everything that we do, all aspects of public policy, including our foreign policy and our defence policy.
And national security. Allan, at this particular moment, obviously, the globe finds itself again dealing with the threat of nuclear war. You make the point that Australia has been very insecure at its heart and in the way that we sometimes approach national security and foreign policy, but that we weren't always that way. We used to be quite engaged, particularly when it came to disarmament. What does the book have to say about that?
Well, the fact is you're quite right. We've got a very, very proud history in the field of disarmament and arms control, but it is history, I'm afraid. For the last 25 years, we've really gone to sleep at the oars and simply haven't done much at all. Now, what Putin has done is really, really serious. It's not just unacceptable, as the Prime Minister has said. It's not just unthinkable, as many of us would say. It is actually immoral. And Australia, given its wonderful resources and its endowment, has a responsibility to get out with the international community and call it for what it is, and to strengthen not only our own efforts in dealing with nuclear disarmament, but working with all of the other like-minded countries, of which there are many, who also wish to see an end to the threat that nuclear weapons can be used to resolve disputes.
Allan, it's such an important book. We find ourselves in such a moment of disruption globally. Why did you want to write this book?
The book has been sort of sitting in the back of my mind for probably half of my life. And it came about, I think, because quite a long time ago, as I became more and more involved in writing Australia's strategic policy, I became more and more aware of the many constraints that we've imposed on ourselves that limit both the way in which we think about ourselves and consequently limit our agency in trying to do the sorts of things that we want to do. So it's been nagging at me. And so sitting in the back of my mind as it was, I found myself, not long after I joined the Australia Institute actually, having to answer a question from a very gifted group of master's students at the ANU who asked me to explain the continuity in Australia's strategic policy. Now, I know the pat answer to that like the back of my hand, and I was just about to use the usual way of answering that, oh, what a good question, and then give them the pat answer. And I thought, oh, it's not fair. Why should I do that to them when I've got an altogether different take on it? So I said, well, look, I won't give you the standard answer. I'm going to give you an answer which holds up a mirror to our own face and explains to you why our insecurity has led us to limit our agency internationally. So I did that, and I was astonished at myself for doing it. So I came back and I had a conversation with Ben, and we decided that the Institute would get behind doing a progressive analysis of where Australia's foreign policy is and where it might go. And that's the origins of the book.
Allan, as I said, we find ourselves in a huge moment of global disruption, obviously most acutely with the Russian invasion of Ukraine at the moment. And in this book, you talk about the fact that we're a very insecure nation and we just have a lot of thinking that confirms the status quo.
Yeah.
What do we need to do that's different?
Well, confirming the status quo is what we so easily do all the time. We join the pack. So whatever the pack does, we do. If the pack decides that it's going to go to Iraq, then we go. If it decides that it's not going to go to the Balkans, then we don't go. So we're very good at following the leader, and we're very good at Me Tooism. And I think both following the leader and Me Tooism are reflections of fairly deep-seated insecurity in the way in which we look at the world.
And we haven't always been like that.
Well, yes and no. We were certainly able to say how important Britain was to us at the beginning of the 20th century, and we then started creating a myth for ourselves. But I think that what happened to us at the beginning of the 20th century, but particularly the huge casualty levels of the First World War, confirmed in our hearts the insecurity that I think was there all the way from first settlement in 1788. Here we are looking at what may well be a watershed in Eastern Europe. And what do? We join the pack. And so I think that what my book would be suggesting to people we should be doing is actually investing our energies into the need to construct a contemporary set of rules which would define the international rules-based order, to refurbish the rules that were set in the immediate aftermath of World War II, because they're not working. It hasn't got a lot of adherence anymore. Lots of people in post-colonial Africa, Russia, China, they're not pretty keen on following these rules, which were established by the victors of the Second World War. So we should be refurbishing the rules in a way that everybody wants to observe them, which means really that rule takers have also got to be rule makers. And that's a big challenge in modern diplomacy. That's the first thing. The second thing that we really need to do as a liberal, well-endowed, open society, looking at the world in which we live, is to take very seriously the implied threat of nuclear weapons use, which is now attending the problems in Ukraine. It is entirely possible that Russia can defeat Ukraine. They've got massive military forces. It would be unthinkable that Russia might want to use tactical nuclear weapons, but we should see it not simply as being unacceptable, as the Prime Minister has said, or unthinkable, as those of us with some sort of moral quotient in our thinking might think. We've got to say it's downright immoral. Now that means we've got to put our money where our mouth is and get serious once again in the business of arms control and disarmament, something that we've largely given up for a quarter of a century.
Alan, no enemies, no friends. Why does that describe Australia?
We're loners. We've made ourselves loners. People in Asia regard us as not fitting in with them. People in Europe think we're just a long way away. And in the United States and North America, we're simply convenient. So we have no enemies because we're not big enough to frighten people, and we have no friends because essentially we're not attractive enough to have friends.
And you talk in the book about the fact that a lot of our foreign policy is really based around this idea that actually we've become quite insecure as a nation and unambitious in our foreign policy.
Yes, that's for a number of reasons. I think we have fundamental insecurities in Australia which date back to the First Fleet. But we've generally been able to manage our insecurity when we've had really high quality leadership and when we've had activist foreign ministers and activist treasurers. And that in those periods, we've been able to sort of cut a bit of a figure internationally. And we might laugh when people like Wayne Swan are told that they're the most successful treasurer in the world and we're good at knocking down tall poppies. But we actually have had leaders who've been very good at operating on the international stage. That essentially is what we need to be doing again. We need visionary leadership, leaders with imagination who can look at circumstances and then turn them to national advantage because they've got a good understanding of who we are and a good understanding of what it is that we stand for.
And you talk in the book about the fact that you can't fix the same old problems with the same old thinking, and that we need a bit of imagination and a bit more confidence. What would that look like for Australian foreign policy?
I think essentially we've got to come to terms with ourselves. We've got to come to terms with our history. We've got to come to terms with the fact that Australia is the home of the oldest living civilization in the world, and that those of us who, just by shape of history, are members of an immigrant community, we've got to accept and respect that the first peoples of Australia actually do know a lot. In the book, one of my insights is that the first peoples of Australia, they belong to this continent. The immigrant communities want to own it. And that difference between belonging and ownership, I think, is quite profound. So we've got to deal with that. The second point, I think, is that we must know what we stand for. And we say that we stand for our values, but we don't know what they are. We never talk about them. And I think it's important that in an inclusive, multicultural community, we do know what our values are. And they must be built around inclusion, respect, accepting the dignity of everybody, of trust, building trust, and of resilience. And on the basis of values like that, we can be a very, very influential country, because we will be modelling exactly what the global community needs for its own prosperity and indeed its own survival.
And you talk a lot in the book about this kind of basis of Australia's insecurity in foreign policy, and that feeling of, being isolated from the rest of the world apart from anything else. But you also make the point that we did once upon a time have confidence. We were very engaged internationally, and that we do actually have quite a lot of power within Australia that we're really not using or being imaginative about. What needs to change?
Well, first of all, we've got to know that we've got the power. I mean, we have enormous power in Australia, and most of us are shy of it. I mean, we're a continent. As Paul Keating said, there not very many people got one of those when God was handing them out. We're a continent. We're a pretty inclusive society. We could be more so, but we're not bad. We're pretty inclusive. We're a highly educated society. We are deep investors in education. We could do more and better, but we are a highly educated society. And on a lot of the indicators, we're very successful. I mean, around about 6 of our universities fit in the top 100 in the world. And for a population of 25 million, that's not too bad. And even in things which may not matter to everybody who's watching us, the Olympics, we normally come in around 8th. Now that'll change over time as countries get richer, but on most indicators, we are a very powerful country. We're the 13th biggest economy. So that is what we should be leveraging. But instead, what we tend to do is to say, well, we're a long, long way away. We can't defend ourselves, and so we'll fit in with everyone else.
It's such a wonderful read. Head out to your closest bookstore. It's No Enemies, No Friends. It's available in all good bookstores near you. And if you ever wonder about what is happening with Australia's national security, its foreign policy, and our defence policy, and you want someone who doesn't sound like everyone else in the national security space, I highly recommend it. It's No Enemies, No Friends, available in a bookstore near you. Congratulations, Allan.
Thank you very much, Ebony.